There was a song that did not belong to the person who wrote it, not because it was stolen, not because the contract said otherwise, but because the moment a certain voice touched it, the original version became a first draft, a sketch waiting, without knowing it, for the hand that would finally finish it. The writer understood this the instant he heard what had been done to his words, and what he felt was not loss. It was something far more complicated, the particular awe of watching your own creation become more fully itself than you had ever imagined it could be. The song was Me and Bobby McGee. The writer was Kris Kristofferson. The voice was Janis Joplin's. And the story of what happened between those three elements in a recording booth in Los Angeles in the fall of 1970, in the final weeks of a life that had already given the world more than it had any right to expect, is a story about the difference between singing a song and becoming it, about the moment when an artist stops delivering material and starts inhabiting it so completely that the material is permanently changed. To understand what Janis Joplin did to Me and Bobby McGee, you first have to understand what the song was before she found it. And to understand that, you have to go back to a man sitting in a janitor's closet at Columbia Records in Nashville, writing songs nobody was asking him to write, convinced against all available evidence that the words coming out of him mattered. Kris Kristofferson in 1969 was not a name that meant anything to most people. He was a Rhodes Scholar, a former Army officer, a helicopter pilot who had taken a job sweeping floors at Columbia Recording Studios in Nashville because it put him in the same building as the music he was trying to make. His family thought he had lost his mind. His commanding officers, when he resigned his commission to pursue songwriting, looked at him with the bewilderment reserved for people who voluntarily choose uncertainty over security. He wrote about freedom and longing and the specific grief of living and the specific grief of staying. He wrote about roads and movement and the people you meet and lose in the spaces between places. Me and Bobby McGee came out of that period, written on a dare from his friend and producer Fred Foster, who challenged him to write a song around a title that had come from a secretary named Barbara McKee. Kristofferson took the title home and built a song around it that was not really about Bobby McGee at all. It was about freedom, about the way two people can share a stretch of road in a season and then separate, and how the separation does not erase what came before it. The song's most famous line arrived like a gift. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Kristofferson wrote it and knew immediately it was the kind of line that does not come twice. He put it in the song and sent it out into the world. Roger Miller recorded it. It was a modest success. Other artists covered it. The song began to circulate, picked up and set down by various hands, appreciated but not yet revealed, because the song was waiting for the voice that would understand not just what the words said, but what they needed. By 1970, Janis Joplin had been famous for 3 years. The Monterey performance in 1967 had announced her to the world with the force of a detonation. Cheap Thrills had gone to #1. She had played Woodstock. She had left Big Brother and the Holding Company and formed 2 subsequent bands, each one another attempt to find the configuration that would let her voice do everything it was capable of without losing what made it unmistakably hers. She was 27 years old and tired in ways she did not always have language for. Not tired of music, never that. Tired of the distance between what she gave on stage and what she received in return. The stage offered its version of love, immediate, physical, overwhelming, then gone the moment the lights went down. What she wanted, what Port Arthur had failed to give her and what fame had also failed to give her, was something more durable. The knowledge that she was seen, not the rock goddess that Rolling Stone had constructed from Monterey, the actual person. She began work on Pearl in the late summer of 1970. The album was, from its earliest sessions, different in tone from anything she had recorded before, looser, more playful, more willing to inhabit a range of emotional registers rather than defaulting always to full-throttle intensity. Producer Paul Rothchild understood this. He knew his job was not to shape the artist, but to create the conditions in which the artist could reveal herself most fully. He built those conditions in the studio on La Cienega Boulevard, and Janis walked into them and began to show sides of herself the public had not yet seen. She was funny in those sessions, irreverent. She made the engineers laugh. She had opinions about the arrangements and expressed them with directness and good humor. She was a person at ease inside her own talent, something that had not always been possible, and that the people around her found both moving and Beautiful to witness, and then Kris Kristofferson played her Me and Bobby McGee. The exact circumstances of how the song reached Janis have been described in different ways by different people. What is consistent across all accounts is the moment of contact, when she heard it for the first time and understood immediately what it was and what she needed to do with it. Kristofferson has described her reaction as one of the most gratifying experiences of his songwriting life. Not because she praised the song, because she didn't praise it, she received it. There is a difference. Praise is what you offer something you admire from a distance. Reception is what happens when something enters you and begins to rearrange the furniture. She played it several times. She sat with it. She did not rush toward the microphone, and what she found when she looked was that the song was about exactly what she had been living: the road, the movement, the people who appear beside you for a stretch and then are gone, the freedom that costs something. She had been living those lyrics for a decade, had understood in her body what the song was reaching for before her mind had fully processed the words. This is the rarest form of artistic preparation, not technical rehearsal, not intellectual analysis, but the accumulation of lived experience that makes certain material available to a performer in a way it cannot be available to someone who has not lived it. Janis Joplin had earned Me and Bobby McGee not through effort or intention, but through having been exactly who she was in exactly the way she had been it. The Port Arthur girl, the Haight-Ashbury wanderer, the Monterey explosion, the exhausted star searching for the recognition that 40,000 voices had not yet managed to provide. The session for Me and Bobby McGee was not long. Those who were present describe it with the reverence people reserve for experiences that resist full articulation. There was a feeling in the room, not tension, not excitement exactly, but the specific quality of attention that descends when everyone present understands that something is happening they will not be able to fully reconstruct afterward. Janis stood at the microphone. Paul Rothchild gave her the signal. The band began to play, and what came out was not the song Kris Kristofferson had written. It was something that contained his song the way a river contains the rain that fell into it upstream. You can trace the source, but the water has become something else entirely by the time it reaches you. Her on the opening verse was almost conversational, intimate. She was not performing for an arena. She was talking to one person, the Bobby McGee who was no longer there, or the road itself, or the listener on the other side of the microphone. The control was extraordinary. This was not Janis Joplin at full power. This was Janis Joplin choosing restraint because the song required it, demonstrating a musical intelligence that her reputation for raw intensity sometimes obscured. And then the chorus arrived, and the restraint broke, not violently, not the way glass breaks, but the way a held breath finally releases, busted flat in Baton Rouge. The vowels stretched and bent and became something physical, something you felt in your chest before you processed it with your ears. The freedom in her voice on that chorus was not performed freedom. It was freedom recognized, the sound of someone encountering language that describes their own experience with more accuracy than they had previously managed. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. She sang it like she had written it, like it had come from somewhere inside her and been given temporarily to Kristofferson to hold until she was ready to claim it. The take lasted the length of the song. When it ended, there was silence in the studio. Paul Rothchild did not immediately reach for the intercom. He sat for a moment with what he had just heard. Then he pressed the button and said, "That's it." Kris Kristofferson heard Janis Joplin's version after she had recorded it. He did not feel diminished. This is the first and most important thing to understand. There is a version of this story in which the songwriter hears what has been done to his work and grieves the original, resents the transformation, however brilliant. That is not what happened. What Kristofferson felt was something closer to relief. The relief of a writer who had always suspected his song was reaching for something it had not quite achieved, suddenly hearing the proof that the reaching had been in the right direction all along. She found the bottom of it in one form or another in multiple interviews over the years. That was the phrase he returned to. Because Kristofferson's version was a good song, well crafted, a great line and a true emotional core, but it was delivered from a certain distance. The narrator observing his own experience with the slight remove of someone who has processed the feeling rather than someone currently inside it. Janis Joplin removed that distance entirely when she sang Me. And Bobby McGee, there was no remove. She was not observing the narrator's experience. She was the narrator, the road was her road, the loss was her loss, the freedom complicated, double-edged, costly was the freedom she had been living since she left Port Arthur at 19 and drove west into a life she was making up as she went. This is what interpretation means at its highest level, not decoration, not stylistic variation. The complete inhabitation of material by a consciousness that has earned the right to speak it. Me and Bobby McGee was not the only thing Pearl contained. The album was, across its full length, the most complete portrait of Janis Joplin as an artist that had yet been assembled. Cry Baby, Move Over, Get It While You Can, Mercedes-Benz, recorded in a single take, a cappella, half serious and half a joke, and completely Janis. Each track revealed a different facet of a performer whose range was far wider than the Monterey footage suggested. But Me and Bobby McGee sat at the center of it, not because it was the longest or the loudest or the most technically demanding, because it was the most honest. In 3 minutes and 50 seconds, Janis Joplin had done the thing that only the greatest artists manage. She had made the personal universal. She had taken her specific, irreducible experience, the roads, the leaving, the freedom that costs something, and rendered it in a form that anyone who had ever lost something or chosen something difficult could immediately recognize as their own. Paul Rothschild understood what he had. The Pearl sessions deepened as October approached into something that felt less like the making of an album and more like the making of a document, a record of who Janis Joplin was at 27, the most fully realized version of herself she had yet achieved. Funny and vulnerable and ferocious and tender, sometimes within the same track. She called her mother from the studio. She made plans. She talked about the future with the natural, grounded confidence of a person who has found solid footing and intends to keep walking. On October 4, 1970, Janis Joplin did not come to the studio. The band arrived, the engineers set up. Paul Rothschild waited. Pearl was 6 tracks from completion, close enough that the finished thing was visible from where they stood. She did not come. Rothschild called the landmark Motor Hotel where she was staying. There was no answer. He sent someone to check, and what that person found is the part of this story this narrative will not linger over. Because the details, when handled without care, have a way of becoming the story, when the story is so much larger than any single ending. She was 27 years old. Me and Bobby McGee was recorded and finished. The vocal performance existed on tape, complete, needing nothing added and nothing taken away. Pearl was completed from existing recordings and released in January 1971. Me and Bobby McGee was released as a single. It reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, the only #1 of Janis Joplin's career, arriving after she was no longer alive to hear it climb the charts. Kris Kristofferson heard it on the radio for the first time, the single, climbing, and pulled his car over. He did not trust himself to keep driving. A song, once released into the world, stops belonging to the people who made it. The work becomes the property of everyone who finds truth in it, and the truth they find may not be the truth that was intended. That is not a failure. That is the work succeeding beyond the boundaries of its own intention. Me and Bobby McGee, in Janis Joplin's version, belongs now to everyone who has ever been on a road going somewhere uncertain. Everyone who has understood in their body that freedom is not the absence of constraint but the presence of choice, and that choice costs something always, and that sometimes you lose the person beside you in the paying of it and carry them forward anyway. Kristofferson eventually said he thought of Me and Bobby McGee as 2 songs now, his version and hers, not competing, complementary. 2 different people who had lived differently, finding different things inside the same set of words, and both of them being right. He said this without resentment and without false modesty. He said it as a statement of fact, with the clarity of a writer who knows that good language is capacious, that it can hold more than one truth without collapsing. More than 50 years have passed since Janis Joplin stood at a microphone in Lowe's Angels and sang Me and Bobby McGee in a single, unrepeated take. The recording has been remastered, reissued, streamed, heard by people in countries that were not yet independent when it was made, through devices nobody in that recording booth could have imagined. And it still does the same thing. It still arrives in the body before the mind catches up. It still finds people in the moments when they need it, on roads, at endings, in the spaces between one part of life and the next. It still delivers freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, with the weight of something fully understood by the person saying it. The song is not a museum piece. It is heard by millions of people every year as something occurring in the present tense, something that has not finished saying what it has to say. Kristofferson, in interviews decades after the recording, still speaks about Janis Joplin's version with genuine awe. Real awe at what one human being can do to language, at the way a voice, applied to words with sufficient honesty, can reveal dimensions of meaning the words alone could not reach. She found the bottom of it, he said. He said it more than once because he had not found a better way to describe what he meant. There is a version of the story of Me and Bobby McGee that positions Janis Joplin as its interpreter, the performer who took Kristofferson's composition and delivered it exceptionally well. That version is not wrong, but it is incomplete. What she did was closer to completion. She brought to the song the specific weight of a life lived in a particular way, and that weight transformed a good piece of writing into a human document, into evidence, into proof that the things the song gestured toward, the freedom, the loss, the nothing left to lose, were not abstract concepts but actual experiences with actual costs. She could not have done this at 20. She could not have done this before Port Arthur, before San Francisco, before Monterey, before the years of stages and roads and the loneliness of being known by everyone and understood by very few. She could only have done this at 27 in October 1970, having been exactly who she had been in exactly the way she had been it. Every part of her life that had felt like loss or the wrong kind of freedom had been, without her knowing it, preparation, not for stardom, not for the #1 single that would arrive after she was gone, but for the moment when a song about freedom and losing and carrying someone forward would need a voice that had actually done all of those things. Janis Joplin recorded Me and Bobby McGee in a single take. She did not go back. She did not try again. Paul Rothschild pressed the button and said, "That's it," and it was. The song that did not belong to its writer or its singer, the song that belonged to everyone who would hear it and find their own road inside it, was finished. It had found at last the voice that could complete it, and the voice had found at last a song large enough to hold everything it had been carrying. Kris Kristofferson continued writing long after 1970. He became one of the most celebrated songwriters of his generation. Help Me Make It Through the Night, For the Good Times, Sunday Morning Common, Down. His work found its way into the voices of Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson and Emmylou Harris. He became a figure whose contribution to American music was measured not in singles, but in the accumulated weight of language given to other people's mouths and made real by their singing. But when asked over 50 years of interviews about the recording of his work that had gone farthest, he returned reliably to Janis Joplin and that single October take, not with sadness, with something resembling gratitude. The gratitude of someone who wrote a door and then met the person the door had been waiting for, who walked through it so completely that the architecture of the thing was finally, fully visible for the first time. She found the bottom of it, and the bottom, when she found it, turned out to be bottomless, deep enough to hold every person who has ever driven a long road at night with the windows down, carrying someone they have lost or a version of freedom they have paid for dearly. Still room for the next person who presses play and hears Busted Flat in Baton Rouge and feels, before they know why, that someone is speaking directly to them. That is what Janis Joplin gave me and Bobby McGee. And that exchange between a song and the voice that completed it proved something quietly extraordinary, that the right voice and the right words, finding each other at the right moment, can produce something that outlasts both of them, something that belongs, finally, to everyone who needs it.